My name is Helen. I'm 20, 6 years old, and this is the story of how everything I thought was real slipped through my fingers before I could hold it tightly enough. I never imagined I'd be the kind of woman who gets left behind, who smiles even when her heart is crumbling. But somehow, that's exactly who I became. It started slowly, the unraveling. At first, there were no sharp words or painful silences, just small things, like moments that used to feel warm turning a little colder, or conversations that ended quicker than before. I noticed the way his eyes didn't search for mine in a room the way they used to. I tried to believe it was just life getting busy, that people grow tired, that maybe love just changes with time, but I was wrong. Love doesn't fade like that, not when it's real. We used to sit together for hours and talk about everything, our dreams, fears, the kind of future we both wanted. He once told me that he couldn't picture his life without me in it. I believed him. I held on to those words like a promise. I memorized the way he looked at me when he said them, like I was something rare, something worth holding on to. I remember the night everything truly shifted. We were out with friends, and I saw the way he smiled at someone else. It wasn't a friendly smile. It wasn't accidental. It was the kind of smile he used to give me, only softer, sweeter, more alive than anything he'd shown me in weeks. My heart dropped, but I stayed quiet. I laughed when I was supposed to. I kept my voice steady. But inside, I was folding in on myself. That night, I lay awake listening to the sound of his breathing next to me, wondering when I stopped being enough. Wondering when the space between us had turned into a silence I could no longer fill. And the worst part, he didn't even notice I was hurting. Or maybe he did, and he just didn't care. Over the next few weeks, I tried harder. I made his favorite meals. I wore the perfume he once said reminded him of spring mornings. I told him I loved him, hoping he'd say it back like he used to, without hesitation, with warmth. But the words that returned felt empty, rehearsed, like they were coming from obligation, not affection. There's a kind of ache that sits quietly in your chest. It doesn't scream. It doesn't demand attention. It just lingers, soft and heavy, like the weight of something you once carried with pride and now don't know how to set down. That's how it felt with him. Like I was holding on to something that no longer wanted to be held. The final blow didn't come with shouting or blame. It came with a look, one simple, tired look that said everything words couldn't. That he had already chosen someone else in his heart, long before I would know her name. He didn't need to explain. I already knew. Still, I nodded when he said he needed time. I smiled through tears when he said he was confused. I watched him walk away and told myself that if he came back, it meant something. That if he loved me at all, he'd fight. But he didn't. I spent the days after in a fog. I would sit by the window, watching the sun move slowly across the sky, as if time had nothing better to do than watch me fall apart. My friends tried to help. My mother called every day. But there are some things people can't pull you out of. Some heartbreaks you have to carry alone for a while before you find your way back. I stopped listening to our songs. I stopped going to the places we used to visit. I deleted photos and messages. But no matter how much I tried to erase him, the emptiness remained. A quiet, aching reminder of what I once had, and what I lost before I truly understood it was already gone. And in that stillness, in that quiet breaking, I began to understand something I hadn't before. Sometimes a heart breaks not with a loud crash, but with a silence so deep it echoes. After he walked away, I didn't cry, not at first. I sat there, frozen, as if the world had stopped turning, and I was the only one left breathing in a place that no longer made sense. There were no words, just silence, not the kind that brings peace, but the kind that wraps itself around your chest and squeezes until you forget how to breathe. I kept waiting for my phone to light up. For a message, a call, some small gesture to say he didn't mean it, that he was scared, that he was sorry, but the silence stayed, and the longer it lasted, the louder it became. It echoed in my room, in my steps, in the space where his voice used to be. It was deafening. I would wake up in the middle of the night, disoriented, reaching out to the other side of the bed like my body hadn't yet accepted that it was empty. And every time I found nothing but cold sheets, that silence roared all over again. I started sleeping with the TV on, just to hear something, anything, that could distract me from the truth, that I had been left behind without a fight. The rejection didn't come with cruelty. That would have been easier to hate. It came with indifference, like I had simply become optional, like the space I held in his life could be filled without effort. I kept going back to all our conversations, all our laughter, the little memories that once made my heart feel so safe. I kept asking myself how something that felt so real to me could disappear so quietly for him. It wasn't just the loss of him that hurt. It was the loss of who I was when I was with him. The way I used to glow when he walked into the room. The way I would rush to tell him about my day. Now those moments sit in my chest like weights, pulling me under every time I let myself remember, and I remember too often. I stopped telling people I was fine. I think they could hear the crack in my voice anyway. I started taking longer walks, hoping the wind would carry some of the pain away, but it didn't. I started journaling again, trying to make sense of things, to write myself back to solid ground. But the pages just filled with questions I couldn't answer. Why wasn't I enough? What did I do wrong? How did I not see it coming? And still, no answers came, only silence. Some days I would pass by him accidentally, or maybe not so accidentally, and he wouldn't even look at me the same. Like I was someone he had simply outgrown, like I hadn't poured my whole heart into loving him. He spoke to me like I was an acquaintance. No warmth, no pain, just distance. That kind of silence is worse than yelling. Because at least anger means there's something left. But indifference, that's the sound of being forgotten. I started wondering if he ever loved me at all, or if I had imagined it. If maybe I had been loving enough for the both of us, hoping my love could carry the weight he never planned to hold. But that thought broke me more than anything else, and yet, somehow, life kept moving. People kept laughing, making plans, falling in love all around me, while I was still trying to understand how something so beautiful could end without even a goodbye worth remembering. I didn't need a grand apology. I didn't want him to regret everything. I just wanted to be seen, to be acknowledged, to be told that what we had meant something. But the silence stayed, and it kept reminding me that I had been replaced long before I realized I was losing him. The rejection wasn't a single moment. It was every unanswered message, every look that passed right through me, every time he chose not to care. And the silence made sure I felt it again and again. I think the hardest part isn't the leaving. It's what's left behind, the air still filled with things unsaid, the nights that stretch endlessly, the questions that never find their voice, and the echo that reminds you, you were not chosen. At first, I thought the loneliness would be temporary, just a passing ache like the kind that follows you home after a long, disappointing day. I told myself that it would fade, that I'd wake up one morning and not feel the emptiness pressing against my chest. But days turned to weeks, and the silence didn't soften. It settled, it stayed. Loneliness, I found, isn't always loud. Sometimes it moves in gently, like a shadow at dusk, quiet, slow, unnoticed until it's everywhere. I would go about my days the same way, brushing my teeth, making coffee, folding laundry. But everything felt dimmer, like the world had lost its color. I didn't recognize the version of myself that moved through it. The hardest part wasn't being alone. It was feeling alone even when I wasn't. I'd sit with friends, hear them laugh, watch their eyes light up with stories and plans, and still feel the weight of something missing. I'd nod and smile, even join in, but inside I felt like I was watching everything through glass. There, but not really a part of it. I started talking to myself more, in the mornings, in the quiet moments. Little things, like you're okay, or just breathe. It sounds strange, I know, but when the person you used to share everything with disappears, you begin to fill the silence however you can. I missed being asked how my day was. I missed having someone reach for my hand without thinking. I missed being seen. The worst was the evenings, when the sun dipped low and the sky turned soft and everything should have felt calm. But instead, it just reminded me of what I had lost. That's when the loneliness grew the loudest. It followed me from room to room, familiar now, like a second skin. I could feel it in the way I moved, slower than before. In the way I paused before unlocking my door, already knowing no one was waiting inside. Some nights I'd scroll through old photos, not because I wanted to relive the past, but because it proved something real had once existed, that I wasn't just imagining it all, his arms around me, his smile directed at me. My eyes lit up with something I no longer recognized in the mirror. I'd stare at those images and feel both comforted and torn apart. I wondered if he ever felt it too, if he ever lay awake wondering how I was. If he missed the little things the way I did, the sound of laughter in the kitchen, the way we used to share everything without hesitation. But deep down, I knew, if he had felt any of it, he wouldn't have let it go so easily. That thought stung more than anything, knowing I could feel this hollow and still not be missed, that someone I gave everything to could move on without looking back, that love, at least for him, wasn't worth holding on to. And yet here I was, holding on to every broken piece. I stopped expecting closure. I stopped hoping for answers. Instead, I learned how to exist in the quiet, to carry the ache without letting it define me, to smile even when it wasn't entirely real. I became used to the echo of my own footsteps, the way my name sounded when I said it out loud just to remind myself I was still here. But even in that loneliness, a part of me refused to disappear. There was still something inside, soft, tired, but still there, a quiet heartbeat, a whisper that said, "You're still here, you're still standing." And some days that was enough. Loneliness didn't leave. It simply became something I learned to live with, a familiar shadow I stopped running from. I wasn't looking for anyone. After everything, I didn't have it in me to hope or wonder or open up again. I had learned to survive the days quietly, to sit with my own thoughts and carry the weight of what had been left behind. I didn't need saving. I had already decided that healing would be something I'd do on my own, slowly, quietly, in pieces. He was always there, but never in the center, always just on the edge of things. Soft smiles, warm eyes, the kind of presence that never demanded anything. I never noticed him much before. He didn't make big entrances or speak too loudly. But after everything fell apart, I started to see things I hadn't before, like the way he listened when others spoke, the way he offered his coat without hesitation, or waited for everyone else to be served before he touched his plate. Little things, gentle things, things I had stopped expecting from people. It wasn't a moment. It was a series of them. I remember dropping my keys outside the cafe one rainy afternoon, hands shaking from too little sleep and too many thoughts. I wasn't crying, but I think I was close. He bent down beside me, didn't say anything at first, just helped me gather the mess with careful hands, and then he looked at me, really looked, not with pity, not with questions, just understanding. "You okay?" he asked. Simple words, soft voice. I almost lied, almost said, "I'm fine." but I didn't. I just nodded, and somehow he knew that meant I wasn't, and somehow he didn't push. After that, he started showing up in small ways. A cup of tea placed gently on the table beside mine. A note scribbled on a napkin that said, "Hope today's better than yesterday." An umbrella held out without a word on days I forgot to check the weather. I kept my distance at first. I didn't know how to let anyone that close again. I was afraid that if I leaned even slightly, I'd fall apart again. But he never asked me to lean. He just stayed there, quietly, like a light left on in a dark hallway. Not blinding, not demanding, just. There I started to look forward to seeing him. I told myself it was nothing, just a habit, just kindness. But somewhere between the laughter he pulled from me and the silence he helped me carry, something began to shift. One evening, we sat on a bench by the lake. I hadn't meant to tell him anything, but the words came anyway, about how I felt invisible, how the person I gave everything to didn't even pause before letting me go, how I started to believe that maybe something was wrong with me. He didn't interrupt, he didn't try to fix it, he just looked at me and said, "Sometimes people don't see what's right in front of them. That doesn't make you any less worthy of being seen." No one had said anything like that to me before, not like that, not in a way that felt true. And suddenly I realized how starved I had been for that kind of kindness. Not grand gestures or promises, just someone willing to sit in the sadness with me without trying to erase it. I started to heal without realizing it, laughing a little more, sleeping a little easier, not because the pain was gone, but because I wasn't carrying it alone anymore. He never asked me to love him. He never needed me to. He just showed up again, and slowly that kindness bloomed into something I didn't expect. Trust. Sometimes healing doesn't come from the person who broke you. Sometimes it comes from the one who picks up the pieces without asking if they're sharp. It wasn't love, not at first. It was something softer, something quieter, a moment that didn't announce itself, but settled gently like warm light through a window. I had stopped expecting anything tender. After everything I'd been through, pain had become a kind of armor, and touch was something I had learned to flinch from, even when it came without harm. I had grown used to distance. I kept people at arm's length, not because I didn't want them close, but because I didn't trust myself to hold anyone again without trembling. I told myself I was healing, that solitude was strength. And in some ways it was, but healing alone is slow. It's quiet. It can also be lonely. Then one day I was sitting in the cafe we both frequented. It had become our silent ritual, sharing space without pressure. He never forced conversation. Sometimes he would just sit beside me, reading while I stared out the window, lost in my thoughts. I liked that. I liked not having to pretend. That day, I don't even remember what I said. I only remember my voice cracking, my throat tightening around a memory I hadn't planned to speak aloud. I remember lowering my gaze quickly, embarrassed by the sudden rush of emotion I hadn't meant to show. And then, without a word, he reached across the small table and placed his hand over mine. It was simple, no grand gesture, just his hand resting on mine, still, warm, grounding. I didn't move. I didn't pull away. I just stared at our hands for a moment, stunned by how something so small could feel so big. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't dramatic, but something inside me shifted. His hand didn't tremble. It didn't press or grip. It was just there, like he was saying, "I'm here, you're not alone," and that was enough. After that, I began to notice the smaller things. The way he leaned in slightly when he listened, like my words had weight. The way he remembered details I had forgotten I'd shared. The way he laughed, low and quiet, like he didn't want to break the air between us. It wasn't that he healed me with some sudden, sweeping love. It was that he never made my pain feel like a burden. He never rushed me. He never asked me to be okay when I wasn't, but whenever I faltered, his presence was steady, a touch on my shoulder, a hand that lingered just long enough to say, "I see you." There were nights when I still cried alone, nights when I stared at the ceiling and wondered why I wasn't enough before, why someone else was chosen while I was left behind. But slowly, those nights became fewer. Not because the pain vanished, but because I stopped letting it define me. I began to believe, little by little, that maybe I hadn't been unworthy. Maybe I had simply given my heart to someone who couldn't hold it. Maybe that didn't mean I was broken, just misplaced. I remember the first time I touched his hand back without thinking. We were walking down the street, not talking, just enjoying the cool air. A car passed too quickly and startled me, and instinctively I reached out. My fingers found his, and I didn't let go. He didn't say anything. He just smiled, the kind of smile that didn't need words, and I realized then that something in me had begun to heal. It didn't happen all at once. Healing never does, but the pain that used to scream had softened into a whisper, and every gentle moment, every kind word, every patient silence, every quiet touch told my heart it's okay to come back. Sometimes it isn't loud declarations that fix us. Sometimes it's the gentle hand that simply refuses to let go. I used to believe that love was something that only happened once, that if it slipped through your fingers, it was gone forever. I held on to that idea for far too long, clutching the pain like it gave me purpose, like letting go of the hurt meant losing everything we ever were. I cried over him longer than I care to admit. My tears fell into pillows, into silent nights, into mornings that didn't feel like beginnings anymore. I loved with everything I had, and when it ended, it felt like something inside me had ended too. The ache became part of my rhythm. I'd wake up and feel the absence before I even opened my eyes. Days passed in a blur of pretending, while inside I was rebuilding myself with pieces that didn't seem to fit anymore. I thought love had abandoned me, that it was something I wasn't meant to have. I didn't expect anything different. I didn't expect him. He never tried to take the pain away. Maybe that's what made him different. He didn't offer easy promises or words meant to fix what couldn't be undone. Instead, he sat beside me on the quiet days. He made room for the silence. He never flinched when the sadness returned in waves. I remember once I told him I didn't think I could love again, that part of me still belonged to someone who never asked to keep it. He didn't argue. He just said, sometimes the heart needs time to remember it can beat for something new. I didn't believe him then, but his words stayed with me. There was a day, not too long after, when the sun was out and I was laughing, really laughing. The kind that makes your stomach ache a little and your eyes water. I hadn't realized he was watching me until I turned to look. There was something in his eyes I hadn't seen before, not desire, not pity, something steadier, something warm, something that didn't need to be spoken. That night I cried again, not because I missed the one who left, but because I finally understood that I didn't miss him the same way anymore. The space he once held in my heart had slowly been filled with something else, something softer, something safe. Love didn't return to me in grand gestures. It came back in pieces, in shared meals, in quiet understanding, in the way he always waited for me to open up, but never asked me to. I didn't fall all at once. I unfolded slowly, like something once frozen learning how to feel warmth again. There were still moments I doubted myself, moments when I'd question if it was real, or if I was just afraid to be alone. But then he'd reach for my hand in a crowd, or make me laugh on a day I thought I couldn't smile, and I'd remember. This was different, not rushed, not reckless, real. He never asked me to forget the past. He never made me feel ashamed for the parts of me still healing. Instead, he let me carry it, and somehow, in his presence, the weight became lighter. He loved me not in spite of my scars, but with them, as if the places I had broken made me easier to hold. I once thought true love was supposed to be perfect, that it had to come without pain, without history. But now I know that sometimes the deepest love grows where the deepest hurt once lived. Where tears once fell, something new can rise, something honest, something earned. It didn't come easily, and maybe that's why it means more, because I know what it feels like to be shattered, and now I know what it feels like to be chosen. Gently, every day, without needing to prove that I'm worth it. Sometimes, the most beautiful love is the one that finds you when you no longer believe it exists. I never imagined I'd say goodbye like this. Not because I don't care, but because saying goodbye means accepting that some chapters have to close for new ones to begin. You came into my life quietly, gently, healing the parts I thought would never mend. You showed me kindness when I was broken, patience when I was scared, and love when I'd almost given up on it. I'm grateful for every moment we shared, for every smile you brought back to my face. But now it's time for me to find my own way, to carry what you gave me forward and keep growing on my own. This isn't the end of the story, just a pause, a turning point. Thank you for being the light in my darkest days. I'll always carry that with me, and maybe one day paths will cross again. Until then, take care of yourself. Goodbye.